site was formerly the Hippodrome Theatre. During nearly 60 years, the theatre served as a playhouse, variety and review venue, as well as a cinema. One of the more significant buildings on St Giles Street is St Giles House, designed by George Skipper for Norwich and London Accident Assurance in 1909. It is currently a hotel and restaurant. The old chapel in Willow Lane was the first Roman Catholic church built in Norwich after the Catholic Emancipation Act of 1826. It was dedicated to St Peter and St Paul and was known as the Holy Apostles' Jesuit Chapel. The word gate, as in Pottergate, dates back to the time of the Vikings and means street. So here we have the Street of the Potters. Much of the area was cleared by the City Council in the 1930s as part of a redevelopment scheme to relieve St Benedicts. Some buildings survived, notably those at the bottom of Cow Hill. Churchman House was built by the family of the same name who were wealthy worsted weavers. The frontage dates from 1751, although this was built on to an older building. It has been described by architectural historian Richard Hewlings as possibly the best Georgian provincial townhouse in England. The Church of St Giles stands on the highest ground within the city walls, and at 120 feet, its tower is the tallest in the city. Independent retailers and restaurants are a feature of Upper St Giles, which since the Inner Link Road was opened has been a quiet, no-through road. The last building on the left was the Norwich High School for Boys, and one famous old boy, Sir John Mills, is commemorated by a blue plaque. The footbridge spans Wellington Lane and the much widened Grapes Hill, part of the Inner Link Road. The Roman Catholic Cathedral of St John the Baptist is the second largest Catholic cathedral in the country and a magnificent example of Victorian Gothic architecture. It was built as a parish church between 1882 and 1910 on the site of the Norwich Jail. During the Second World War, being such a landmark, the tower was used as a turning point for returning aircraft. It became a cathedral in 1976 for the new Diocese of East Anglia. In 1856, Henry Trevor, a local cabinet maker and upholsterer, began transforming a disused industrial site to form a Victorian garden worthy of any large estate. After World War II, the garden was abandoned and became overgrown. The Plantation Garden Preservation Trust was formed in 1980 and began a programme of restoration. At the bottom of the hill is the award-winning Grapes Hill Community Garden, a complete contrast to the Plantation Garden, but a peaceful haven for local residents. Also at the bottom of Grapes Hill, parts of the city wall are visible. The walls were built to a height of around 23 feet in the 14th century to defend the north and west of the city. The Tower of St Benedict is found surrounded by a modern brick-built housing complex. The main body of the church was destroyed by the Baedeker bombing raids of 1942. St Swithin's Cottage is a 17th century Grade II listed building. It brings rural Norfolk into the city centre. Behind it is the Hampshire Hog Yard, suggesting that the building was once the Hampshire Hog Public House, run by the Stewart and Patterson Brewery until 1912. St Swithin's Church is a small building with no tower and no obvious entrance. The tower was demolished and replaced by the turret in 1882 after sewer works made it unsafe. It first closed in 1891 but was fully restored and reopened in 1905, remaining in use until 1951. After spending time as a furniture store, it became the Norwich Arts Centre in 1980, hosting regular live music, drama and comedy. St Benedicts is part of The Lanes, a vibrant area of independent traders, cafes, restaurants and cultural venues. St Margaret de Westwick, which because of additions and rebuilding has a piecemeal look to it, was closed in 1975, 8 years after a new stained glass depiction of the Ascension by Michael King was installed in the east window. St Lawrence is the largest of the churches along St Benedict Street. It has a number of distinguishing architectural features, including the turret in the northeast corner of the tower and the 11 clerestory windows. It is used for occasional services each year and is maintained by the church's Conservation Trust. The writing on the side of the old Eastern Electricity Building on Westwick Street is the entire novel Utopia by Sir Thomas More. The artwork was inspired by local artist Rory Macbeth, and the building was due to be demolished just over a year after it was painted in 2009. Strangers' Hall was for a long time the home of mayors and grocers. In the mid-16th century, Thomas Southerton, mayor and MP, encouraged Dutch refugees to settle in the city and work as weavers in the textile industry. It is thought that he provided accommodation for some of these strangers. Today the building is in the care of the Norfolk Museum Service. The Meadow Market Theatre was originally built as a Roman Catholic chapel in 1784. After closure as a church, the building served as a warehouse and factory until converted by the Norwich Players in 1921 into an Elizabethan-style theatre. St Gregory's is the last of the 5 St Benedict Street churches, but is best seen from Pottergate, where the cleared churchyard creates an imposing open space. The present Quaker meeting house was opened in 1826, although Quakers have been worshipping on this site since the 1600s. The design was by J.T. Patience, who also designed the Willow Lane church seen earlier. Number 17, Pottergate, was in the late 19th century used by the fire service as residential accommodation for the fire station which was opposite. Bagley Court gets its name from Charles Bagley, a builder who lived here in the 20th century. St John's was closed for regular Anglican worship in 1981. The clerestory is faced with freestone in a similar fashion to St Lawrence Church on St Benedict Street. At the top of Norfolk House on Exchange Street, the East Anglian Arms and a Norfolk wherry can be seen. In the old post office yard on St Andrews, there is a single bay of a former 5-bay 15th century house, and on the opposite side of the road is further evidence of postal activity with Stamp Office Yard, and next to that, evidence of the former offices of the Norwich Building Society. The Bridewell began life in the late medieval period as a residential house. Subsequently, it was used as a prison, a tobacco and snuff factory, a leather warehouse and a shoe factory. In 1921 it was bought by the then Lord Mayor Henry Holmes of Edward and Holmes Shoe Manufacturing Company, who had it converted to use as a museum and presented it to the city. Legend has it that Armada House was built using timbers of the Spanish fleet washed up on the Norfolk coast. Suckling House and Stuart Hall can be found opposite St Andrews Hall and are presently used as an independent cinema. Suckling House, the central flint building, dates back to the 1300s. St Andrew's continues the line of churches from St Benedict Street and is the second largest medieval church in the city. The main nave dates from 1506, but records show a church on this site from 1386. St Andrew's Hall was formerly the friary church of the Dominican Blackfriars and was built between 1326 and 1470. Blackfriars Hall, which was the friars' choir, became the chapel of the city council and over the centuries was used as a school and a church for the strangers. After the Reformation, the buildings were purchased by the city to be used for civic events. Norwich University of the Arts dates back to 1845, when members of the Norwich School of Painters founded the Norwich School of Design. It was awarded university status in 2013 and has a campus centred around St George's Street. The East Garth building is regarded as one of the most complete examples of a medieval friary building in the country. The present Fye Bridge was constructed in 1933 and stands on the site of at least 4 previous structures. It is thought that this was the first bridged river crossing point in the city. The Church of St Simon and St Jude was made redundant in the 1890s, and part of the tower collapsed in 1911. After years of neglect, it was brought back into use in the 1950s, initially as the headquarters of the Norwich Scouts and Guides. Elm Hill is the most complete medieval street in the city. It was originally a street of goldsmiths, weavers and dyers who relied on the river as a mode of transporting goods. Much of the area was destroyed by fire in 1507. The houses were rebuilt and became the homes of many prominent people, including a number of city mayors. By the early 1900s, the area had become a slum. A plan by the City Council to clear the area was halted by the intervention of the Norwich Society in 1927. The name Elm Hill came from an elm tree that stood in the square near the Britain's Arms. The tree succumbed to a Dutch elm disease epidemic in the 1970s and was replaced by a plane tree. The Tower of St Peter, Hungert, has a cap in the shape of a pyramid which was added in 1906 after the tower became unsafe and was partly demolished. Today the church stands as an exhibition centre run by the Hungate Medieval Trust. Princes Street combines the charms of Old Norwich on the north side with stark modern architecture on the south side. St George's, Tombland, sits between Tombland Alley and Princes Street. It remains a traditional high church within the Anglican tradition. Tombland was at the heart of the early settlement and the site of the original market. The name derives from the Scandinavian word for open space. St Mary the Less was closed after the Reformation, but unlike many of the other churches, it was not demolished. Since then it has been used by a variety of denominations, including the Strangers. It is currently privately owned and the most hidden of all the Norwich churches. After a run on the pound in 1825, the Bank of England set up branches in major cities to avert any future financial crisis. The Norwich branch opened in 1828 and closed in 1852. St Michael at Plea, at the end of Queen Street, is a continuation of the line of churches that began with St Benedict. The name At Plea comes from the fact that the Archdeacon's Court was held in the church. Made redundant in 1973, the building is now in the care of the Historic Churches Trust. On entering London Street, the artwork Spirit of Norwich can be seen, depicting a family sheltering under the roof of a house supplied by the Abbey National Building Society, the commissioners of the artwork. In 1967, London Street was the first shopping street in the country to be pedestrianised. The NatWest Bank on London Street looks very much like a church designed by Christopher Wren. but it was actually built in 1924. Swann Lane and Bedford Street are a significant part of the lanes, with a number of independent shops. Look carefully and you will see many references to former Norwich businesses. The frieze window, seen here at the top of St Andrew's Hill, indicates that this building was used by weavers. Amelia Opie was an author, poet, and a leading female campaigner in the fight to abolish slavery. She spent the last years of her life living on Castle Meadow. Castle Meadow was constructed in 1900 for the tram network and widened in 1927. Davy Place and Castle Street. The London and Provincial Bank, now the Ivy, and the terracotta frontage of Jarrell's department store were both designed by George Skipper. The Guildhall was the biggest civic hall outside London when it was completed in 1453. The East End was rebuilt in the 16th century and features a fine example of flint checkerboard design. It remained the centre for courts and councils until the opening of City Hall in 1938. The Norwich Public Library was founded in 1784 and was one of the first subscription libraries in the country. The current building, now used as a restaurant, was completed in 1837. Another George Skipper building can be seen as you enter St Giles, originally the Norfolk Daily Standard Office. The statues by Alfred Hardiman behind City Hall represent recreation, wisdom and education, and were commissioned by the City Council.